there's been, over recent years, there's been numbers of occasions where we've gone to war, or we've come very close to going to war, on not a full vote of Parliament, as there's a group of MPs, judges, who are called the Privy Council, and with just 6 members of the Privy Council and the Queen's signature, the whole country can go to war.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That was how we went to war, I believe, in the Gulf War.
Very flimsy evidence as well.
On very flimsy evidence, and
so much of it manufactured apparently as well, not even genuine evidence, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they're
Weapons
saying...
of mass destruction.
Where?
That
Where
were
are
never
they?
found.
In fact, the bloke that tried to find them, wasn't he kind of suicided or something?
Yeah, he came to
couldn't find
an
him.
unfortunate end.
Dr. Kelly, yes.
Yeah,
Actually, one of our
forget
MPs
that
did a lot of
good
work on that. Actually, Norman Baker did a huge investigation on Dr. Kelly. Yeah.
And again, in terms of transparency, that's something I think people are still looking for, more transparency from Dr. David Kelly. I believe it's the Chilcot report into how we went to war against Iraq.
Oh, I've got questions for Tony Blair.
The Chilcot report, they still haven't decided how much of it will be disclosed to the public. And another report that was recently declassified was into the Gulf of Tonkin, which happened about 40 years ago, when some Vietnamese torpedo boats allegedly attacked some American cruisers. And that was the reason for the American involvement in the Vietnam War. And the paper since declassified that there was no torpedo attack, and it was effectively a manufactured story, and then placed in the press,
flag.
What's known as a false flag. And there's Operation Northwards, which was declassified in 1997, which spoke about an airliner flying over Cuba, which was to have the appearance of being shot down. This operation was one signature away, John Kennedy's signature away, from actually happening.
Yeah, that's right.
Recently, we've had reports in Syria of chemical weapons attacks, and it's subsequently been shown that the BBC, of all people, re-edited the sound to say that it was a chemical weapons attack, when the original footage says that it was just an incendiary attack.
The BBC airs exactly the same footage but digitally alters the word napalm for, quote, chemical weapons, hoping no one will notice.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of napalm. Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of chemical weapon.
In Syria, we didn't go to war.
They wanted Assad out so they could install a regime, a new government they could work with and manipulate them. That's my guess.
Syria, being supported by the Russians at that time, made it so that we weren't able to...
The Russians were peacekeepers as far as I can see. Complete peacekeepers.
I think this issue has a degree of urgency attached to it. You know, where we are finding ourselves at the present moment with the situation in Ukraine, and I think it really does deserve some sort of scrutiny. The procedures that lead a nation to war.
Well, the media is like revving up a new Cold War, which could go hot. And there's a new language to be learned. You know, false flag is one of them. You attack yourselves, or you pretend to be attacked, to galvanise the population behind the war effort. And then another new phrase, the military-industrial complex. I hadn't heard it until I started looking around online. And the military-industrial complex, for those that don't know, is all of the companies that manufacture weapons and sell them, earn lots of money, the associated spin-off industries, and lo and behold, they also encompass reconstruction companies, like the Carlyle Group, who will go into countries that have been blown to bits, like Iraq, and they rebuild the infrastructure on no-bid contracts.
Hello, Dick Cheney.
So they're making the bullets and the bandages and profiting out of the destruction of people, their landscape, you know, the pain and suffering for profit. It's
Essentially-
morally corrupt.
Essentially, it's a gigantic racket.
Yeah, and the media is complicit because they get the population of the country who, say it's America for instance, they want the support of the people, so it's viewed as being a just war. So a process of demonisation is embarked upon, probably false, made-up information to make someone look like a monster. Oh, he's attacking his own people.
Well, going back to government transparency, I would like to see complete and utter transparency regarding the deals and which US military companies, which contractors were involved in the dealings with Trident, because we're getting the story from the press, from the government, that this is actually a necessary means of defence. We as a nation require those submarines out all the time with the Trident system. Now, actually, we know that we don't. The world has changed and the world has evolved, but yet this basic military program that we've been set up on hasn't. And it seems like it seems bizarre, actually, that we're still kind of being forced. We're paying out this money for an archaic system.
When the Malaysian people are being spun a load of propaganda by the media, the papers, the TV and everything, who could be being paid for by these multinational corporate interests and the military-industrial complex, when you get the people on side with these like war efforts, actually take away the mind control of this awful propaganda, and we the people don't want war. In England, we the people in Germany don't want war. We the people in Syria don't want war. It's the lot at the top who spin it all and control the media so that it happens. And people are getting their arms and legs blown off. Their children killed. For what?
I believe it was. I think it was Joseph Goebbels who said that people by themselves won't go to war.
No.
We have to give them an excuse to go to war.
You've got to make them
that was in reference
your
to
neighbours, a perceived threat from somewhere else.
Well, that kind of brings us on to the situation in Ukraine and Malaysian Airlines. Over the last week or 2 weeks, we've heard a huge amount about who is responsible, how it came to
disgusting
come about,
propaganda,
and to actually find the factual evidence. The Americans are using what they call open source evidence, which seems like anything that suits their case from YouTube. And I think 4 days after, on the 21st, after the aircraft disappeared, the Russians released all their air traffic control data, all their radar data, all their military radar data.
Even satellite imagery as well.
And that seemed to rule out and rule in certain possibilities. And since then, we've had no transparency since from the people that actually, if you follow the propaganda, we're led to believe are the most honest, impartial purveyors of the press.
There's a systematic process of demonising the Russians and Putin ongoing right now. It started a little while ago. Now, I don't believe the papers. I don't watch the news because, to me, they're called a news story for a reason. That they are simply stories sometimes, make believe. From what I found out, Putin is looking after his people by making the trading of GM foods a criminal act. They know that GM foods are no good, and he's protected. He did wonderful things in Syria by keeping the peace. I've sort of lost my thread a little bit, I'm sorry, but I can just see...
Destroying the chemical weapons, I believe the Russians helped with facilitating what could have been a very dangerous situation, becoming much
There's
safer.
a channel called RT News, isn't there? RT is fantastic news.
Yeah.
So what you're essentially saying,
Martin.
what you're essentially saying is that the media and the media on our government's behalf is fostering a new boogeyman.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm not sure if it's on our behalf or and for our government, because it's one. thing that I've looked into for quite a long time is the history of NATO. And after the Second World War, NATO recruited ex-Nazi agents across Europe to be what they called stay-behinds, so that if the Cold War became hot again, that and the Red Menace came across the Berlin Wall, then these agents would form insurgency and resistance groups to make sure that Western Europe could remain free from the Red Peril. These remained in situ for over 20 years, and it was only when the Italian Communist Party looked like they were going to join into coalition that NATO changed their strategy for the stay-behinds and started what's called the strategy of tension. NATO then arranged terrorist attacks in Italy, one of the most famous being the Bologna train bombing, which killed 80 people. The Italian Chief Justice, Gianpietro Posimato, he has published a book at the end of 2012 detailing the evidence of not just that incident, but an incident involving Aldo Moro, who was kidnapped, Prime Minister of Italy, who was kidnapped and murdered, and also another incident involving the death of 3 gendarmes, 3 police officers. And it was NATO's intention that to cause these difficulties, that the electorate would then elect a right-wing government which would be more sympathetic to NATO's needs, which is what happened in Italy.
It's called terrorism, isn't it? NATO were actively involved in terrorism, acts of violence and fear, for political, that's terrorism.
Yes.
NATO.
And NATO has expanded towards the east, involving Lithuania, Estonia and the Balkan countries. Russia was concerned at this and contacted NATO about how they join NATO, to which NATO refused them any dialogue with joining the alliance. So therefore to the Russians, NATO is declared as a hostile alliance. The Americans have also been pouring billions into the endowment for democracy in Ukraine. Yeah. And I think this is where...
Hunter Biden's now on the board of one of the biggest energy companies. Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, the eminent American, politician.
And they have been putting a lot of money into that.
We economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country, it goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh, sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, vote with us on the next critical UN vote, allow us to build a military base in your backyard, something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders, and if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we've developed. We've created what I consider a mutant, viral form of capitalism. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world. I've met a lot of terrorists. I've interviewed them for books. I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They're desperate people. If we want to get rid of terrorism, we must get rid of the root causes, that cancer that is destroying our whole system. Because I think it's really important that we understand today we cannot have homeland security unless we understand that the whole planet is our homeland.
we'd like to hear what your thoughts are on the Malaysian Airlines incident and how those play into that.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a very interesting one, that one, which actually nothing close to the truth has been brought out about it. Just touching on the MH17 one, I don't know how many people are aware about some of the actual facts that happened with it. Initially, it was an air-to-air missile that was shot to the sea. It was a heat-seeking missile which took out one of its engines in flight. It maintained flying attitude. However, because of the altitude it was at, it couldn't run single engine nor ops. Because the altitude it was at, the drag and power involved, it went through a 180-degree turn involuntarily before they were sent up the Buck missile to take it out. When this happened, it put it 200 miles out of the path of where they wanted it to come down, which is why there's been quite a lot of weirdness to do with it. That's one thing. I've heard some theories that, oh, actually it was MH370 put in its place to blow it up to get rid of that evidence. That cannot be so. The transponders on the aircraft are fixed to it. They have got an inbuilt device which gives out its call sign that cannot be easily and quickly changed. There are different factors with the two aircraft as well. They were not identical. I want to come back to the 370 now. From my aviation knowledge, having flown airliners for a number of years, there are so many things which do not add up about it. The facts that do add up about it is that it was spotted flying on an eastbound track westbound track to the west of Vietnam. Now, the altitude it was at adds up to something called VFR, which is visual flight rule. It was not in an airway anymore. Now, if you're flying north, east, south, west, you add 500 feet. If you're flying north, you're at an even level. If you're flying east, you're at an even level plus 500. If you're flying south, you're at an odd number. Now, this was found flying level 29,500 feet, which is east. It means it was under manual control at the time. It was not been under remote guidance at the time. There's also other information on certain naval and military movements. Now, an hour and a half prior to MH370 disappearing, US Air Force AWACS aircraft was sent up. Now, those do have cloaking technologies. However, the one thing they forgot to do when they cloaked that aeroplane, it wasn't shot down, it was cloaked, it was hidden from secondary radar. What they didn't take into account, because they studied their own fleets of 777s, which are General Electric powered, not Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce are unique in the fact that it constantly pings engine data back to Derby. It's that once every 15 seconds it will send a ping, which is very basic. It's just like oil is what it's doing what it should be. The vibrations are doing what they should be. They're all the limits. All it's to do is to alert engineers down the line. Oh, there's a weird vibration. Have a look at the limits on the ground to prevent something going wrong. Now, this was not closed, and its last ping was picked up at about 650 feet, 1 mile out from runway 28 into Diego Garcia, which is the perfect glide path angle to landing, under control. Another thing about the 777, it was the first flight-by-wire aircraft to have a system put on board. In the event of a hijack or a terrorist attack, it could be then taken control of remotely. Now, it's not just the flying instruments that can be handled remotely, everything from oxygen as well can be handled remotely. So it could be decreased to a level where people are either unconscious
so the
or
cabin pressure type?
Yes, same thing.
Right. What, they could be killed?
Yes, or not unconscious.
Okay.
They can reduce to a level where you go into hypoxic.
I heard that planes could be remotely controlled.
Only some, not all. Only some.
It's 777s. I believe Lufthansa, when they discovered that system was there, they stripped out at a cost of over $1 billion.
Yeah, they opted
all
out.
that system from there.
Yes.
And what's Diego Garcia?
Diego Garcia is a British colonial island 600 miles south of the Maldives, which has been leased to the United States as an Air Force base, and it's massive. It's naval plus Air Force, absolutely huge.
If you look at it in Google, on Google Maps, it looks like Tracy Island.
Yeah.
With a huge budget thrown at it. It's got runways, it's got internal harbours. They probably have quite a number of underground installations there, and more than enough hardware to take over a couple of small
And if
countries.
you look at Google Maps, which we did very recently, there looks to be a lot of unexplained trails coming from the actual water trails coming from the actual island. Could be submarines.
What would the purpose of the cloaking, the disappearance of the flight.
Well, on board, it was on its way to Beijing. There was a bunch of engineers on board who were about to do a deal with the Chinese government for this multiprocessor chip, which the details are, we don't know the exact details, nobody knows exactly what it was, but they were going to do a deal with it. What did happen, 4 days after the flight disappeared, 4 of the engineers, plus one of the Rothschilds' names, were filed as a patent with the US yeah. And it was about 5 days ago.
So the technology ended up in American hands,
yes,
is that the gist?
Yes, in American hands. And now there is only one patent holder.
And
because
who
as
is?
patents go, US semiconductor owned by Rothschilds.
Surprise, surprise.
Yes.
That name crops up so much when you're doing your research, doesn't it?
And once again, we go back to the old bloodlines, and
Yeah.
you know, I don't think
Fascinating, isn't it?
I think that the whole idea that we're living in a world of conspiracy is not too far removed from the truth, you know.
Yeah.
And the idea that there are old bloodlines, and you know, dare I say it, an Illuminati out there. I'm not. So the realms of fiction.
Yeah, New World Order, Illuminati, all makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it could just. I don't think there's anything apart from greed that's motivating this. You know, it seems to be that's the conspiracy, greed.
There are other ideas, I think, because they're rich enough already, aren't they? You know, how much more money do you want? You know, power and control.
Yeah.
Well, power and control is what would seem like if you have enough money, then the power and control to keep your money or to keep your agenda moving forward. And that's the interesting thing with flight MH17 was you said that before, I think it was one of the engines was hit and it did a turn. If it hadn't have done that, it would have landed in
controlled territory where they could have immediately got access, which is not what happened.
So that's a false flag type event, yeah, which would get us one step closer towards World War III with Russia.
Well, this is what a certain amount of the press coverage that we have seen, Eastern Russia. As far as I'm aware, they held elections and referendums, which had an exceptionally high turnout, and a lot of people voted for to be able to have independence or a certain amount of autonomy rather than remain in Ukraine.
The Ukrainian parliament or authorities are being spoken about as if they were legitimately put there, but that's not what I've seen. It was like a coup d'etat, you know, some kind of coup.
Well, it's interesting. There's a telephone call quite recently made public from Victoria Nuland, who is the American Secretary of State, where I think it was most famous for her F-word and the EU. And considering that the whole Ukrainian situation was supposed to be about their freedom to join the European Union, for her to say that doesn't matter if the United Nations are going to approve the government that they put together. And the worrying thing about that is Zabovda.
And that was back in December that happened. And it's all transpired as per the person she mentioned is now in power in the Ukraine.
Is now in power. And the Deputy Prime Minister is a member of what used to be the Socialist Nationalist Party. They've recently changed their name to Zabovda. And they are an openly right-wing, anti-Semitic party, which is being backed by some of that $5 billion of NATO money. And I think with the way
BP, I believe, as well.
Sorry?
I think BP as well are quite interested as well.
Well, all the Western corporate interests are just queuing up at the door, aren't they?
I mean, I think you can look at it, a lot of it as well is the fact that you've got all the countries surrounding, like Iran, for example, are being taken down systematically. I mean, this is going to be down to do with money, greed as well. Ukraine, they couldn't do Syria, so they went with Ukraine. What's next? Well, I mean, that's.
There's always seems to be edging towards Iran, doesn't it?
Eventually, I mean, I think that's their ultimate goal, to take Iran, because that's right next to Israel, as you already know, and really.
So, I mean, geologically,
No, that's fine. No, I meant as in right, they're very close together with regards to being, trying to be taken over, what have you. Once Iran itself, which we hope that doesn't happen, that's pretty much when you're going to see all the oil, for example, the Americans, for example, their oil will be suddenly come out of nowhere, like for example under Yellowstone Park, which holds the biggest national reserve of oil on the entire planet. Using it.
There's a lot of uranium in Iran as well. There's a lot of gemstones, there's a lot of precious metals, there's a lot of heavy metals as well as
They're a sovereign nation? Are they independent from the Western banking interests? Rockefellers, Rothschilds?
I would have thought so because of all the sanctioning that's happened.
I would have thought so.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I heard that Putin kicked out the banking interests, and that's one of the reasons maybe to demonise him so badly. He's now rebelled against the New World
The
Order.
Rothschild family.
Yeah.
Good old Putin.
And aren't they just living it up in the City of London as if they've got some immunity, but they're wanted for charges in Russia?
The City of London, what a corrupt
Cartel.
cartel of rich, nasty, agenda-led scum. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, but
Okay, now back that up with some facts and
well, we're sitting here today discussing so many just unbelievably incredible situations and problems, and just I'm left astounded with the state of the world. I can't explain why the world is the way it is. We can sit around here and we can pinpoint certain issues. We can pinpoint things like, what's going on in Ukraine, like what's going on with, the Malaysian Airlines and such, and go, that's not quite right. But it's all being buried, and it all kind of seems to be buried under the auspices of somebody gaining. And what are we looking at in London? It's all about gain, greed, money, more, excess. Same in Wall Street.
On that, why on earth is the Malaysian Airlines black box from MH17 being brought back to Farnborough before being given to the Dutch and the Ukrainians?
I didn't know that.
There's an agenda.
Just going back to your point.
Actually, and it's actually Qinetiq that actually have the black box.
Yeah.
And Qinetiq was a company that I wanted to bring up a little earlier in terms of intelligence services and kickbacks. Because before it was called Qinetiq, it was called the Portland Down Research Institute, Chemical Research Institute. And it was privatised. And when it was privatised, the final golden share was sold off, I think, in 2001 for £145 million was the value of the research establishment. Everybody who wished to invest in it had to be approved by the intelligence services. The value of the company, when I last checked a month or so ago, was in excess of £1.5 billion. So if you were fortunate enough to have £10,000 of shares in that company, it's now worth over £100,000. And for some of those people, in terms of intelligence agencies, in terms of files disappearing, those people who are intelligence approved, or who maybe intelligence agencies have leverage over, these are the ways in which those people can obtain quite large kickbacks.
Crony capitalism.
Very legally, and also if you're a member of Parliament and invested in that, and also have a close relationship with the intelligence agencies, you may be persuaded to
I'm glad you mentioned
add your voice to the pressure against Mr. Putin or Mr. Assad.
Now, Portland Down was actually, I got it wrong at the beginning of the programme, but the spraying of cadmium, the people, it was an experiment. They forget the village name, but it's easily findable. You just type it into Google, cadmium Norfolk. It was Portland Down. I think it was back in the 60s.
Yeah, I think, just going quickly back to my point, the two facts that we have in our arsenal that we are being led and being, our fates are being determined by greedy scum, is that where are these corporations finding their money from? Who are investing in these corporations? It all comes back to the banks. And the biggest point in case that we have is, who is leading the nation? None other than the son of one of these scumbags. And who is he taxing? He's not taxing the rich, he's not taxing the wealthy, he's picking on the poor and the working class.
Yeah.
That is enough information right there, you know. I cannot find any justification for the way that this government is operating.
Type into YouTube, all wars are bankers' wars, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All wars are bankers' wars, and you find this 45-minute educational documentary type thing, and it's fascinating.
So we had a banking collapse 7 years ago, and as you mentioned, there was a huge bailout. Me personally, I lost the job I had at the time because the company I had to work for had to clear a certain amount of its overheads.
I lost my job.
And clear its workers. So lots of people have suffered for that bailing out of the banking industry. You mentioned earlier that there are some oligarchs in London who are living it up, and the British authorities refuse to arrest them. There's a number from Iceland where they have very, very solid cases, and the British government will refuse to until the Icelandic government and their banks finish their court cases.
It's so important, Iceland, because we were never told by the media that they had a revolution. The revolution was not televised. No media covered a total blackout of the Icelandic revolution.
And this goes to
we should have been told.
The point that I want to reinforce in terms of your opinion on the city of London and build from that, is that the transparency in the city, which we were promised with the bailouts, hasn't come through. And when we go and talk to people on the streets who say there's a problem, do you think there's a problem with secrecy? Do you think there's a problem with the financial system? They always say, when there's a problem, you need to look at what the problem is before you can solve it. And we're not able to do that.
It was Iceland that woke me up. I'm bang awake now, because the moment the documentary I was watching showed 3,500 people standing outside the Parliament buildings in Reykjavik, throwing bananas, rocks, banging pots and drums and these whistles, and it said that it was an Anglo-American bank that caused the trouble. A private bank caused all the trouble. Where the same Anglo-American banking interests control our media. That's why we weren't told. That makes sense to me.
Well, and the funny thing is that what terrified them the most was that the revolution was completely peaceful.
Yes.
This is what I think that Russell Brand is trying to articulate in some of the discussions that he had with, particularly one with Jeremy Paxman, is that the revolution is not forming. I actually think the revolution is brewing, but it's not brewing in the way that the media would like us, or the politicians would like us to believe it is. Violence, people running on the street, riots. It's an awakening.
Yeah.
And I think, getting together and talking like this, and particularly people from different walks of life and such, being able to talk openly about some of these, obvious cracks in the world matrix, it must terrify some of those people in high places.
Hillary Clinton said when she was Secretary of State, whilst petitioning the Congress for I think almost $1 billion, that they're losing the information war, and they needed to support their media organisations
and infiltrate independent media.
And yeah, very much so. Do you think that there is a change that's happening?
I think Middle England is under a spell. The mind control being cast by the controlled media, and we're awake to it. Yeah, we see the lies and the propaganda. It feels like lies and propaganda here, anyway, because we weren't told about the Icelandic revolution. You can't stage it. I talk to people on the street and say, no, they didn't have a revolution. Come on. I said, no, they arrested the Prime Minister and the Rothschild bankers. They arrested them. 3,500 people throwing stones at the Parliament buildings. That's a revolution in my book. You can't pay 3,500 people to stand there and falsify it. You can't fake it. It happened. We weren't told.
We're experiencing a false flag at the moment in the City of London with Boris, buying in 7
water cannons.
Right, water cannons. Yeah. We don't need that. We don't.
Preparing for trouble, do you think?
Well, or maintaining the illusion that we're getting ready for trouble.
And I think the same thing's about Trident, isn't it? There's obviously a very strong lobby in Parliament at the moment that actually, you know, the Trident is replaced like for like. You know, and you know, if you look at all the independent evidence that I've seen, actually, there's clearly no evidence that actually, you know, the reason why Trident was brought in the first place is still there. Actually, yes, we need to have some form of deterrent to protect ourselves as a country. Of course we do. But actually, you know, to spend billions on a like-for-like replacement of a submarine system, I just think, you know, when you look at the sort of financial crisis the country's in, just doesn't seem to me to stack up really.
Right, did we get rid of the Royal, almost half the Royal Navy, put it in mothballs, got rid of half our sailors, all the admirals were all gone, and suddenly we're building a brand new warship and a brand new sort of state-of-the-art aircraft carrier.
And cynically filling them with fresh meat cannon fodder, who, you know, young guys and women who will not question authority, whereas old guard, the old guard have grown quite cynical, and you started to see during the whole Afghanistan conflict high-ranking officers coming out and criticising the government.
Yes.
And
very quickly to touch back on what you're saying about maintaining this image about revolution, the water cannons, the whole thing, there could be trouble going on the street. It comes back to this whole thing about the digital clampdown on spying and everything like this. In my mind, the revolution will be digital. It is digital. The revolution is out there on the internet. It's people doing things for themselves, saying, I'm not happy with this, I'm going to do, no. You know, the wars are now digital. It's that for saying we've got to spend money on this, that keeps the money going. The wars are digital, the revolution is digital.
A very interesting point as far as that goes, because I've had a number of. I can't believe what's going on in the world. I think we should take up arms and go on the street. And I turned around to the chap and said, "You have taken up arms, and you are on the street." So in the 20th century, we're looking at Kalashnikovs and petrol bombs as being armed. Today, we seem like we're looking at a video camera and a megaphone as a way of being armed, and as a way of...
We won't tolerate war, corruption, and all the pain and suffering that goes along with it.
I think we're all, you know, essentially pacifists. I think we're born pacifists, and I think it's a conditioning that occurs via the media, via
it's the societal sort of engineers. It's like a higher consciousness is what we're supposed to, you know, to achieve world peace. We need a higher consciousness, which I've kind of just thought to myself, it's caring. If someone in Ukraine is having their house blown to bits and their children killed, then we should care enough to because if it happened here, we would want someone to stick up for us and stop the destruction, wouldn't we? So we should do it for our brothers and sisters abroad.
And not just caring, but also communicating as well. And I think on that note, we're very close to running out of time today. And thank you all very much for coming here and communicating, sharing your ideas, and moving the conversation forward.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.